Hey, what's up everybody? So tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about my switch to mirrorless after just about 15 years with the DSLR and how that experience has been for me. Now I wanted to mention first that I started out shooting on film, and so that makes a big difference in the way that I learned and what I've come to expect over the years. For a lot of people that started out during the film era, you had to learn a whole lot about, exposure and how to control everything, and you pretty much have to learn what to expect from your camera, what your camera sees. And so honestly, when switching to a digital SLR, I learned quite a bit quicker. It sort of sped up the process for me. Going to a DSLR, I feel like it did help me learn a little faster instead of basically waiting until, days until I could get film developed to see how things turned out, and then go back to my notebook to check my settings and see what I did. And half the time you forgot what you were trying to do in the first place. And so, your progress was a little bit slower, I feel like, back in the film days. Now I bring up all that to sort of talk about the first point about shooting mirrorless cameras, and that's basically the EVF and the sort of what you see is what you get thing. Now, for a lot of the old school people out there that learned on film, learned on digital, you've been shooting for a long time, you know your exposure fairly well already, the EVF won't make as big a difference for you as it will for the person just starting out. For those of you that have been shooting a long time, I do feel like it helps a lot when you start pushing the edges of your meter, when you start doing really long exposures, or when you're doing like basically like really high key or really low key images, anything where you're pushing the meter really far away from its sort of neutral point. I feel like it's much more helpful in that situation. Another benefit of the EVF, of course, is that you have the live histogram directly in the view, and so that tells you everything about your shot as you move the camera around, so you can see the dark, the mids, the lights, all that sort of stuff all at the same time. And so that makes it very, very helpful. I find that to be one of the most useful aspects of the EVF. Yeah, and another thing that everybody's talking about with the EVF is focus peaking, and I agree, the focus peaking is awesome. I like that I can be shooting in automatic focus mode, and then all I have to do is sort of grab the focus ring, and all of a sudden, my focus peaking lights light up, and it just makes it very nice and very easy. So one really big benefit I want to talk about with the EVF is sort of a reminder that you get when you look through it. You may have had settings previously for something else, a few minutes before that you were set up for, and if you forget, you go into your camera and you go to take a shot and wow, you're wildly overexposed or something. On a DSLR you may not notice it either. You may not even notice it at all if you don't look at the back of the camera. So in this case, as soon as you look through the EVF, you're going to notice, wow, I'm wildly overexposed. I need to hurry up and change some settings. So, with the DSLR, that moment might have already been gone. So it serves as a nice little reminder. Now, another big benefit of the EVF is being able to set up a crop and view it that way through the viewfinder. If I want to, shoot in a square aspect ratio, or maybe an 8:10 view, or a 16:9 aspect ratio, or whatever, you can set that up and be able to see exactly what you're going to get. And so that makes it very helpful. I believe that to be a really useful feature. And in the same regard, being able to view picture profiles in the viewfinder is fantastic. If you want to set up everything to come in black and white, you can shoot it in black and white and see everything in black and white. It makes it very, very helpful, and that's, to me, one of the biggest benefits of the EVF. Now, despite all of those benefits, I did want to say that, you know, the camera that I have is the Nikon Z6 II, and while apparently that EVF is better than quite a few of the ones out there on the market at this point, I would say that it's still slightly cartoonish, and that can have a really sort of off-putting feeling at first, and until you get used to it, it can be very slightly strange or uncomfortable. And so, you know, the refresh rate's pretty good. It doesn't really stay blacked out for very long when it takes a photo. So there is, you know, it's a pretty decent one, I would say, compared to some of the older ones. However, it can still be a little bit off-putting. Another thing that's related that's kind of off-putting as well is when you have, let's say, a menu. When you hit a menu, it brings it up to, in the viewfinder to your eye. And for anyone that has shot a DSLR or an SLR for years before that, that can really throw you off because it's just so strange and alien to see anything other than real life in front of your eyes at that point. On a similar note, you also can set your camera to display the image for a second after it's taken. And so you take the photo and then it displays the photo for a minute, overriding the viewfinder image. That to me is really weird and throws me off a lot, and also would kill the moment for most types of photography, in my opinion. So I definitely set mine not to do that. Now, another great thing about a mirrorless camera is being able to use the live view mode effectively. On the DSLRs, especially on Nikons, the live view was basically worthless. Being able to use the live view really helps out a lot. Now, that can really help out some of you guys who wear eyeglasses. As you know, if it's hot and humid or something, you put the camera up to your eye and all of a sudden everything, you know, gets foggy and you can't see anything. The live view really helps out in that situation. Yeah, I can even take off my eyeglasses and be able to see very clearly on the EVF. If I have any problem, I can do that, and it just makes things a lot easier. Now, another real benefit of the mirrorless is the fact that your autofocus is done right on the sensor directly, and so it seems a lot more accurate to me. You know, when you have a DSLR, you know, you might forward focus or back focus a little bit depending on the lens that you've got, and you may need to set up and do some AF fine tuning to get them sort of dialed in perfectly, and that's a problem you don't have on the mirrorless at all. So another awesome little benefit that I've noticed, it's not something that you would use all the time, but whenever you want to do multiple exposures, doing it with the EVF is a lot easier. You know, take the first photo and you can still see it when you go to do the second photo, and it allows you to be more creative and more accurate in your double exposures. Very nice and very helpful doing that. When you're doing double exposures on a DSLR, you pretty much have to remember what you shot on the first frame and try to compose with that mental recollection for the second. And so it's not nearly as accurate or, you know, or as easy. Now, of course, another cool thing is the ability to have in-body image stabilization. So, of course, you know, I have, you know, some old school manual focus lenses and things like that. That makes it really cool. Some of the lenses that were really good on my SLRs are even better on this mirrorless camera, for example. So now, one thing I would mention is that, you know, coming from my background, I normally do a lot of landscape, and you know, growing up, I never really had to do much other than manual focusing. So I never was a good student of learning all the proper focusing modes and all the best ways to, you know, picking a, you know, focus point and all that sort of thing. I've never been super fancy about that sort of stuff, so I'm not really the best person to speak to in terms of, you know, the autofocus performance. I had a D500 before this, as well as a D800 and some other cameras before, and You know, I would just say that the autofocus seems really good for me. I really like the, you know, eye autofocus tracking, you know, and I can quickly switch over and override to manual with focus peaking, and so it's great for me. I really have no complaints on that. Is it as good as my D500? I really don't know. I'm honestly not the best person to sort of you know, go through that and really understand it. It seems to work well for my needs, and so I'm quite happy with that. Now, of course, the video autofocus is much better than the DSLRs that I've ever had before. That helps out tremendously, and so that's very helpful. Not super important if you're, you know, a still photographer, that sort of thing. However, it is a big benefit for anyone that wants to get into video. So another great benefit of the mirrorless camera is the ability to use the silent shutter. Now, you may not always be able to use it, you know, for example, if you have flickering lights or too much action in the frame and that sort of thing. However, it can be very useful in certain situations. One little trick that I like to do is to take some photos in, you know, audible mode where they can hear the shutter and they know that it's going off, and then turn it to silent and take some sneaky shots when they're not expecting it. That makes it very nice. So one thing I would mention that I did really like is the fact that, you know, you can charge the battery directly through USB. That's pretty awesome and super helpful for anybody that travels on the road and that sort of thing. That can be just super useful. You could, you know, charge the one camera battery in your camera itself, and then you could also charge another one, you know, in a car or wherever, depending on what kind of setup you have and that sort of thing. Of course, one of the big benefits of a mirrorless is the fact that, you know, the flange distance from the back of the lens to the sensor is much shorter, and so that allows you to adapt pretty much any DSLR or SLR lens onto it from nearly any brand, really. Focus peaking makes it very helpful in that regard because you can pretty much effectively use any manual focus lens very well. Another thing I wanted to mention about the shutter is that since you don't have a mirror to flip around and everything, the shutter is already quite a bit quieter, and it sounds really good. It's very nice, and so really that makes a big difference as well, not only in the sound but also in the fact that you get less vibration from the mirror, and so it allows you to, you know, take sort of longer exposures, handheld, and that sort of thing. So you already know that you won't get the battery life out of it that you would a DSLR. However, I would say that the rated specification is quite a bit off, and you'll probably do much better than the spec. So yeah, I really wanted to make this video, you know, not so much for the people that are just starting out who probably a mirrorless camera would be their better option at this point, irregardless. What I would say is, you know, I kind of wanted to make this for you guys who, you know, are shooting DSLRs, maybe you've been shooting them for quite a long while, you have a good bit of gear, and you can't help but hear all the benefits of mirrorless and decide and kind of wonder to yourself if it's really worth it to you. And I would just wanted to point out that, you know, for a lot of you guys, you may be just fine with your DSLR. You might be better off to wait, you know, 5 or 10 more years or whatever until, you know, till your camera truly is obsolete already. Because, you know, a lot of the DSLRs made over the last 5 or 10 years are fantastic and will be for another 5 or 10 years. I don't know if I would suggest spending, you know, the $2,000 or whatever to get a, you know, mirrorless camera, only to have to start over again with your lens collections and that sort of thing. Anyway, guys, I'm sure I'll miss a few things in this video, but I did really just want to talk about my, you know, experience in shooting, you know, mirrorless for the first, you know, time. I've been shooting now for about 2 or 3 months with mine. and I will eventually do a full-on review, but I really didn't want to do that until I had a better understanding of the focus modes and all the little, you know, technical things, and really things that I don't normally use. I mean, honestly and truly, doing a review for a DSLR is super simple and super easy because there's very little functionality to it that, you know, I haven't been using for 10, 20, you know, 15 years now. You know, with a mirrorless, because there's so many more features and everything, I have to really put more thought into how I'm going to set it up. You know, what kind of buttons do I want to use? What button placement? What do I need to access quickly? That sort of thing. Because there are just more options. So I'm trying to wrap my mind around all that before I do a full-on review of it. But if you get any questions about my Z6 II or anything, feel free to let me know. They just put out a brand new firmware update for it just yesterday or the day before. One thing I would mention that you'll see a lot of people talking about how, you know, mirrorless cameras are going to get, you know, firmware updates all the time, you know, whatever. My advice is don't hold your breath on it. Don't expect it to ever improve after you buy it. If it does, then cool, you know, but otherwise I would just say that, you know, don't buy it assuming that those updates will come, because you don't know when they will. I mean, honestly and truly, at some point it benefits the company more to, you know, have you upgrade to a newer body than to just keep putting out, you know, updates to an older body for them. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So anyway, guys, if you have any questions, if there's anything I really missed, feel free to hit me up and I'll do my best to help you out. Take care, guys.